Good evening and welcome. The Leukemia Foundation acknowledges the traditional owners of the various lands that we're coming on together this evening. We recognise their continuing connection to the land, the sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, for they hold the stories, traditions, culture, and hope for their people. Welcome to this seminar, which has been specifically designed for people on watch and wait. So firstly, before we kick off, some of you may be aware that this month, September, is Blood Cancer Month. During the month of September, the Leukemia Foundation joins with national and international counterparts to bring greater awareness and understanding of blood cancer and blood disorders to the broader community and advocate for more to be done to improve the health outcomes for people living with blood cancer and blood disorders. To introduce myself, my name is Linda Saunders. Along with my colleagues Jay and Jenny, we will be running tonight's seminar. Between us, thanks Jay, between us we have many years of experience working in nursing and allied health, with a particular focus in cancer and blood cancer, working across hospital settings, large metropolitan hospitals and small regional hospitals in both acute and non-acute and community settings. I'd also like to welcome Michelle Sutherland with us tonight, who you can see on screen with her camera on, who will be sharing with us her personal experience of watch and wait in today's session. So to kick off, some people with blood cancer and blood disorders do not necessarily need treatment straight away, and some never need it. Often information and support we know is geared towards people who are on active treatment. We often hear that the information that is often available is not relevant to people who are on watch and wait. So we recognise people in this phase of treatment or management have a really unique set of psychological and physical challenges. Hence, we have designed this particular seminar with the needs of people in watch and wait in mind. A couple of housekeeping matters before we move into the presentations. The chat function is working. And you can add your questions and comments there. So for some of you who aren't familiar with Zoom, it's if you hover over the bottom of your screen, there's a small chat button. If you open that, a small bubble, you can add questions and comments in there. We do ask that those comments are kept respectable and are considered before you share them in that chat, because that goes to the entire group. These questions and comments that you put in the chat, along with the pre-submitted questions that some of you sent us, will be covered to some extent in the presentations, but then we can expand on that in the group discussion that we will have after the formal presentations. I do want to emphasise that we aren't able to address very specific and personalised medical and clinical questions. So we do ask you to consider that before you enter those questions into the chat. As we've mentioned, if you could keep yourself on mute, that would be fabulous. We can also do that for you if necessary, and your camera off during the formal presentations when we're recording. As I've mentioned, for the best experience, have your view on speaker view for presentations, and then we'll change it to gallery view for the group discussion. At the end of the formal presentations, the recording will be paused for us to have that discussion without the concerns of being recorded, and for purely the purposes of confidentiality and privacy. At that point in time, you will be able to put your cameras back on. So to kick us off, I am going to start with a introduction of our guest speaker. one of our guest speakers, Michelle Sutherland, who you can see on the screen with us. Michelle was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia in 2021 and within a week attended her first LF online support group. She found the support group that day extremely valuable and continues to attend as regularly as possible. She's on watch and wait with her CLL and is also managing other health conditions that are impacting her ability to function. She's always on the lookout for opportunities to learn and to be engaged. So in 2022, she joined the LF Consumer Engagement Group. This has led to several opportunities to get involved, including providing input into a CLL patient booklet, being part of the Education and Support Program Committee, and speaking here this evening. Michelle is a risk expert and has worked in this field most of her career, including roles responsible for crisis management, physical security, fraud investigations, and quality management. She's currently working as a risk manager for the Victorian State Government, and she finds the skills she uses at work help her navigate her own health uncertainty. Michelle is married with 2 adult children, and she loves hot chips, black coffee, and magnets. Interesting. Hoping we can potentially hear a little bit more about that. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Okay, so sorry, I've just written a little bit of an intro that maybe Linda has already said. So I was diagnosed in March 2021 with CLL and I'm on watch and wait. I found out that I had CLL through a routine blood test, and I was having regular tests to monitor a different health condition. And when 2 results came back in a row with high lymphocyte levels, my GP sent me to get it checked out by a specialist. At my first appointment with a hematologist, I was greeted at the door and they said, "Hi, you have CLL and you're going to be okay. Come in and have a seat." They then explained the watch and wait stage and that it could be a long time before I needed treatment, if ever. They then listed a bunch of symptoms and told me that it was really important to pay attention to these. Problem is that they were everyday things that were common to many conditions like tiredness, dizziness, fatigue, swelling, and sweating. And it's such a unique experience to be told you have a condition that they understand, that they know how to treat, but they're not going to do anything about it for you. And then you're sent home with a booklet and a "don't worry, but please pay attention." CLL and watch and wait were terms that were not unfamiliar to me, as my grandmother had had it and she was on watch and wait my whole life and she'd never needed treatment. So I went home and I told my husband and kids about my appointment and went about my day. I read through the booklet and found some information online and just felt good that I was informed. However, that night when I lay down in bed, I started thinking about my blood, how I felt like I could feel bad blood pumping through my body. I remember feeling my glands and wondering how I would know if they were their normal size or if they were swollen. Was I sweaty because it was a hot night, or was this CLL sweating? Was I tired from my big day, or was this CLL tiredness? The awareness and focus and expectation to pay attention felt overwhelming. And while it did eventually settle down, the ongoing roller coaster of blood tests and waiting for results keeps it bubbling away. I was initially on 6 monthly checkups and told after a few of these, if all things were stable, I would move to 12 monthly. And on my 4th one, I went in expecting that maybe this time it would move to 12 monthly, but instead I was told to come back in 3, that I needed to go and get some additional baseline tests done as well. By the time I went back in for my results after these 3 months, I was mentally prepared to hear that I needed to go in for treatment, but then they said, "Great, these are stable, see you in 12 months. To help manage this roller coaster, I have people on my team. Like many of us, I'm managing other health conditions. So in addition to supportive family and friends, I have a team of people that includes my GP, my hematologist, the blood cancer support coordinator, a physiotherapist, occupational therapist, and a dietitian. Because there are a few people on that list, when preparing for appointments, I used to worry I might forget to tell the right person an important update or that I might miss something altogether. I realized I was taking on the accountability to know and understand what was important to each of them. So now everyone gets to hear about everything that's going on for me, and then they can ask for more detail if it turns out to be relevant. And letting go of that responsibility has been really helpful. When I was diagnosed, I shared it with almost everyone immediately, and this was a decision I made to help me manage the expectation of doing things and going places. I know I'm in the minority here, but as an introvert who loves being at home, lockdown was people living in a world that I'd sort of dreamed about before, staying within 5 kilometers of my home and not within 6 feet of another person, and being able to work from home. Seriously, though, lockdown provided me with opportunities to make positive change in the way that I live and work. And life is a lot easier for me now. And being diagnosed during COVID felt like an easier time for me, as people inherently understood the risk to me, and wearing a mask was never questioned or made me feel awkward. Advocating for my needs at work was trickier, though. And while working from home is more acceptable, my workplace expected that everybody had attended the office 3 days a week. And for employees to take personal responsibility for not coming to work unwell, but I wasn't comfortable taking that risk. And unfortunately, I needed to navigate a really unclear process at my work and talk much more than I had expected to about the adjustments that I needed to remain safe. Working from home and working reduced hours are the adjustments that I have in place now, but it did take a bit of time and process to get there. While I prefer to be at home, I do miss going out sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, especially with my husband, because we used to go out and see live music a lot. And while I have some physical needs, accessibility needs, the needs around COVID-safe practices and ventilation are not something that is available now, and it's when I feel the safest. So while this stops me going out with him and then I feel guilty because I'm not comfortable to go, we do make it work, and he now will go out alone or with friends if I decide that the venue's not acceptable. As Linda mentioned, in my day job, I'm a risk manager, and risk management is all about managing uncertainty and understanding what is within your control and what is not. It's about understanding what you want to achieve and then making a plan to get there, paying attention to the things that could take you off track, and be ready to respond. So I found applying these skills to manage my health really helpful. Being on watch and wait, I never know when a symptom will show up or a blood test result will change. So I make plans and I pay attention, and I'm ready to adapt and change all of the time. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for your personal insights, from the time of diagnosis to navigating life and work and relationships. I'm sure there are many people in the audience who can really relate to what you've just shared. So look forward to hearing more about that experience in the group discussion a little later on. Now I am going to hand over to Jay Manning, and Jay is going to be talking to us about the clinical aspects of being on watch and wait, and the actions that you can take to maintain some control of this phase of treatment. Thanks, Jay.
Linda. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to share my screen and show you a presentation. So my background is a haematology nurse of a long time, long before I came to LF actually. So I'm going to concentrate on pretty much the sort of clinical aspects. I guess lots of people already know all of this, but it doesn't hurt to refresh your memory. And if there's anyone newly just diagnosed, then this is a good way to find out some more information. So what is watch and wait? Well, watch and wait's a time when your blood cancer's slow growing or low grade. Like Michelle said, you may not have even known you had it and it's picked up by accident. That actually happens more often than you think. And it really is quite common in watch and wait. You feel well, you've got no problems caused by blood cancer, and you may have some symptoms, I guess, that, as Michelle said as well, also come under the umbrella of all sorts of other problems, the flu or being tired or having a busy life. So that fits in the watch and wait scenario as well. You won't have any treatment for your blood cancer apart from perhaps some supportive care like some blood transfusions, platelet transfusions, some steroids maybe, something like that. But no, certainly no chemotherapy or radiotherapy treatment or immunotherapy these days. Your blood cancer is monitored by your treatment team with blood tests and scans, possibly. And your treatment team can mean lots of different things, I guess, to lots of different people. You may see your GP regularly. You might go to a hospital regularly. You might live in a regional area and go to the local hospital and see a visiting hematologist or any of those scenarios, really. It's more about being monitored regularly with blood tests. Your treatment's delayed until you need it, and that way you're not exposed to the side effects of treatment, because realistically you don't need any treatment to control the blood cancer that you have, and it can really feel like nothing is happening. And like I've put on the side there, lots of people call it watch and worry instead of watch and wait. Not uncommon. So symptoms. So you may have some of these, you may not have any of these, you might have all of them. It just depends on your disease, and it depends on you as well, and your lifestyle, your age, if you've got any other health problems. There's so many scenarios. So that's why we make it and talk very generally, I guess, which I know can be frustrating, and I apologise, but we are trying to cover everybody. So common symptoms are fatigue, that awful fatigue that isn't relieved by having a sleep. You just feel really tired all the time. Pardon me. So you can have a good night's sleep and wake up just as tired as you did when you went to bed. Losing weight when you aren't trying to, that is not uncommon. So it's something to be aware of. Fevers or recurrent infections, so particularly through winter, you'll pick up every flu going. You'll pick up every bug there is from your kids or your grandkids or other kids. You go to the shops and come home with something, so that's not uncommon either. And it's hard to know whether that is a flu, a head cold, something to do with the cancer you have, or it's just a simple virus. It's hard to know. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things, because this time of the year it's really common to have, all those things floating around. Cognitive changes, so people call it brain fog. So, it's you're not quite with it, I guess, is the wording for it. You're not really confused, but it feels like you're in a bit of a fog. And drenching night sweats. So drenching night sweats are one of the symptoms that you really need to talk to your doctor about. They're not common. You may have them occasionally, but if you start having them regularly, then you need to definitely bring that to the attention of and I would suggest your GP first. So what can I do? Be a partner in managing your disease. That's a quote from a patient. Someone who is on watch and wait, sorry. And many people on watch and wait feel like they should be doing something. So these are some suggestions straight from patients even. So learn as much as you can about your blood cancer. If you want to know when something's different, I guess you need to know what you're looking for. We have great information on our website on all the different blood cancers. We've in the resources page that we will send with a link, with the recording, there's lots of information there. Other places like Lymphoma Australia, Myeloma Australia, lots of overseas sites have lots of information about blood cancer. So try and learn as much as you can. Know the signs and symptoms that may mean your blood cancer has progressed. Attend all appointments and have any tests as recommended by your hematologist or treatment team. I think there's a danger in watch and wait to think this kind of isn't happening and I don't need to do all the things that the doctors tell me because they only see me every 6 months or 12 months or whatever. But that's the only way they will know if something is changing. So please at least have all your blood tests done, and do them when they ask you to have them. Don't wait a few months, or because they get them separately to seeing you, so they can have a look even without seeing you. Be aware of any changes in your disease symptoms. I know that that's a bit of a oxymoron, I guess, if you don't have any symptoms. But I guess the thing is to be aware of something that's different. So if you have some symptoms and you just think they're a flu or something like that, I guess, keep a bit of a diary to see if that's different for you. It's different to how you felt. And if it persists, because there's a bit of a difference between symptoms that persist and symptoms that come and go, then at least you'll know and you can follow up with someone in your team. Do some regular moderate exercise or movement. Everyone talks about movement these days. Just keep moving. And that is one thing you can do just to keep yourself generally healthier. And along with that, maintain a healthy weight as well. And then some actions that you can take. So simple ideas that are in your control. Join a blood cancer support group to talk to other people on Watch and Wait, because Watch and Wait is quite isolating, I think. And there's not many people who are on Watch and Wait. A lot of people don't talk about it because they don't want to talk about the fact that they have a blood cancer anyway. So they won't tell some people. So I think, if you want to talk to other people who are in the same boat as you, that's really reassuring. Form a support network, like Michelle suggested. So whether that's your GP and hematologist, or your family, your friends, even one family member, one friend, something along those lines. But you have to have someone who's in your corner, not just you. Be aware of any change in your disease symptoms, which I already said. Have all the cancer screening recommended for your age and gender. So have mammograms, have skin checks, do your bowel screening. Not pleasant, I know, but we all have to do it. Because just because you're on Watch and Wait, with some blood cancers, you're more at risk of being diagnosed with, or having secondary cancers, sorry, should I say, or being more susceptible to developing another cancer. So that's why we say have all the cancer screening that you should. Use sunscreen and get regular skin checks, because we should be doing that anyway. But again, some blood cancers make you more susceptible to skin cancer. So make sure you do that. And keep up to date with all your immunisations. Avoid live vaccines, which I'm sure all the haematologists and GPs talk about, if you didn't know already, but that's definitely what you should do. And plan a vaccination schedule with your treatment team so that you know when things are due. If you haven't had whooping cough, say, for a while, a whooping cough vaccine, make sure you know when that's due. Your GP should be able to tell you all of that information, or if you don't see a GP very often, then certainly ask the haematologist when you go and see them. But that's something that you can do, keep track of. I mentioned a diary. That's a really good way of keeping track of what's going on. You can put some questions in there. If you don't see a doctor, if you only see a doctor every 6 months, if you see a doctor and then you think of a question a month after that, and it's not you don't really need an answer right now. If you write that down, by the time you see the doctor, you'll still have that question. You might have answered it yourself or got an answer from someone else, but at least you'll know that's a question for you. Doesn't have to be in writing, a diary, paper, or anything like that. Phones these days have notes apps. There's lots of apps actually for health problems. Keeping track of all of your health problems. So it's a good idea to look into all of that as well. And I guess I quite like the ideas that are in your control. I like that wording, because I think Watch and Wait, people have everything taken out of their control, and it's a good way to get back to having some control over your life and your disease as well. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Jenny now. who's going to talk about lifestyle impact of being on watch and wait.
Thanks, Jay.
Now, let me stop sharing, Jen. There you go.
Must be my turn. Okay. So I'm Jen, and I have the great pleasure of working for Linda and with Jay and Michelle, who's a joy. And I wanted to briefly touch on some of the lifestyle impacts of watch and wait. So my background is as an occupational therapist. So how this influences our everyday life and what we do and what we don't do is of special importance to me, I guess. So I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know, in that a diagnosis can present huge challenges and changes in your daily life. And I guess the four main things we hear about are the impact on work life, leisure, and lifestyle, on our sense of meaning, motivation, and how we set our goals, on who and what to share information with, and I guess about communication in general. So just some key points around work, leisure, and lifestyle. There are so many benefits to maintaining a sense of a normal routine, of a connection to others, a sense of achievement, a sense of esteem. There's financial rewards with work, and a feeling that we're investing in the things that are important to us in our life. We're building the kind of life that we want. But the challenges of a diagnosis might mean that your ability to do these things is unpredictable. And Michelle talked about that so eloquently when she talked about even going to see live music and needing to assess a venue. And even the difference of a venue might change her decision about whether she goes or doesn't go. And on top of that, I think COVID really taught us to assess tiredness and our ability to do things easily. It taught us about infection risk and how we need to be careful and aware of others. And I think some of the key things around meaning, motivation, and goals are deeply impacted by these things. So, do you keep doing what you've always done? Or do you have to adapt and change and consider perhaps changing any of those work, leisure, lifestyle elements of your life? So I think in that sense, it's really important to reflect on your values and your priorities, to really think about what's the most important thing for you to do. And particularly, as Michelle's pointed out, if you're a bit low on energy, time, or interest at certain times, how do you adapt? How do you be prepared to change? Can you speak to others, your family, your friends, perhaps even your workplace, to help you clarify what your goals are and what are the things that give you meaning and keep you motivated? So telling people has pros and cons. Michelle was pretty upfront and got out there on the front foot, which was brilliant to see. And it can take the pressure off you in a lot of circumstances, particularly in the workplace. If someone knows, they can be looking out for you. It can help manage people's expectations of you, and particularly if you look well. And I'm sure you've all heard that, but you look so well. And in your mind, you're thinking, but I feel so rubbish. And that's a really common experience people talk about. So you need to think about who you want to tell and what you want to tell them and how you want to tell them. So what you tell your work colleagues might be different to what you tell your immediate family, which might be different to what you tell distant acquaintances or your children or your friends. So communication, I think, is key to all of these aspects. And as your situation and needs change, your communication style might need to change too. And I think most people would say to us that that is an ongoing process and you need to be clear and regular in your communication. I think the other key thing is that your GP or your specialist need to be talking to each other and need to be talking with you. So there's an element of communication, not just in your personal circles, but in those professional circles and with anyone who is providing care to you. So now you've thought about your goals and what you value and what you want to achieve. Oh, I can't get this slide to move now. The thing to think about is how you manage your lifestyle. So the aspects of who. So who have you got in your network or on your chosen team to help you? What resources are available to you that you could consider using? And how are you going to keep your health goals on track? So if we think about teams, often we fall into the trap of just thinking about our medical team. So I just want to challenge you to think a little bit more broadly today. So if we think about perhaps medications and symptoms, have you got a plan with your general practitioner apart from your regular reviews to think about, do you need a chronic disease management plan or a mental health care plan? Do you need to have your medications reviewed? Is it safer for you to set up a telehealth conference with your GP rather than have to go into a crowded waiting room? Is there a practice nurse that you can make friends with who can give you some good advice and support? And have you considered the use of a survivorship care plan to drive the conversation and start asking specific questions about what will keep you healthy and how you plan to do that? And for your pharmacist, have you asked them about how to help manage the medication you're prescribed? And have you thought about how that might impact with over-the-counter or any supplements that you're taking? For emotional health, have you considered a psychologist? They can help you manage adjustment to your diagnosis, but they can also help you learn strategies to manage the uncertainty or fears or anxiety around any other issues that you've got going on. You might know a social worker, or you might have a great bunch of friends, family, mob, or work colleagues who can help you. For your health and fitness, have you thought about using a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist to help you with managing your fitness and fatigue? An occupational therapist for fatigue management, energy conservation, or some strategies for managing those cognitive or mind or thinking changes? Dietitians can help with managing energy levels and find you foods that really nourish you. There's lots of cancer wellness centres in local areas that you might be able to access, or community health centres that have really great community-based programs for living with chronic conditions. For work, there's always occupational therapists, there's return to work coordinators, and there's often people at work specifically there to help you with those things. So there's lots and lots of information available to you. And I want you to think more broadly about who you can have on your team to help with those everyday things. So to help you keep your health goals on track, there are some really brilliant things. Jay's already mentioned keeping a journal or a diary, and we have a little diary that helps track a lot of your health needs. There's other great resources like Gather My Crew that help coordinate friends and family to provide care and meals or dropping off kids or picking up kids. And the other thing that's fantastic is we've now got a little digital toolbox that you can use that talks about a lot of the topics that you've told us that are of importance to you and give you good information and tips on how to manage things like fatigue. And finally, there's loads and loads of resources out there, from apps through to different helplines and through to various other health organisations that we think have great resources and are reputable places to seek information. So build your team. I'd like to hand over now to Linda to go into much more depth on the greater part of this conversation, which centres around those psychological impacts and adjustments to watch and wait. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Jen. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen. Thank you. Thank you to Michelle, Jay, and Jen for really beautifully describing the clinical and the lifestyle impacts of being on watch and wait. As a social worker, which is my background, having worked in blood cancer for many years, my focus has always been on obviously the whole person, but with a particular interest in the emotional and psychological adjustment that that ensues after a cancer diagnosis. So this evening I'm going to cover 5 really key areas, and these key areas are derived from our practice wisdom and knowledge from people like yourselves, hearing your stories and your experiences. And it's also supported by the literature and the research into better understanding the experiences of people living with watch and wait. So we're going to be looking at making sense of the diagnosis, burden of management, lack of awareness and understanding, altered mood, and feelings of grief and loss. So making sense of my diagnosis and plan. And I'd really like to emphasize that the list that I have shared is not fully exclusive, that you might relate to none of what I'm saying, one aspect, some of it, all of it. What is really important is that you feel acknowledged and heard in your experience. But everyone's personal reaction to a cancer diagnosis is really unique to that individual. So, making sense of the diagnosis and the plan. So, some describe that sense of shock that comes along with the diagnosis. And I think, as Jay and Jen have talked about, and Michelle, that often a diagnosis is discovered on an incidental blood test. So, it comes as a huge surprise. But for some other people, it may come with a sense of relief, having experienced subtle but unusual symptoms for perhaps quite some time, or very non-descriptive symptoms for a really substantial period of time. So relief can come with diagnosis. The expectations versus reality. So this is this sense that society's expectations, it's often the way cancer is portrayed in the media, is that when a person is diagnosed with cancer, they have treatment. So this approach to managing blood cancer is at total odds to these expectations and to these assumptions. So what then ensues is a psychological response. And this looks at managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. So perhaps you may have lots of thoughts around what you're meant to think or feel, what will happen if I'm not treated, which may then lead to feelings of confusion or frustration or anxiety, or that sense of uncertainty which so many of you speak of. And it's those feelings that then and thoughts that often then drive our behavior. So we might find ourselves more easily frustrated, or perhaps unmotivated, or unable to sleep or eat, or unable to just generally not be the same as we usually are, not able to quite cope with the same level of stress as we normally would. But we do know, and as Michelle has attested to, that with time, with the right information, and about our treatment, and that information is delivered at regular intervals, that feeling understood and the right support is key. And in these quote bubbles, you'll see some comments that people living with blood cancer have shared with us that you might find relatable. Burden of management. So it's that sense that managing symptoms is primarily the individual's responsibility, and Michelle did allude to this. And it can be that sense of feeling heavy, or feeling like it's weighing on your shoulders. And then to add to that, the responsibility of recognizing when changes in your health are happening. So a simple cold, is it a simple cold, or are there other things changing? Is this disease progression? And I think the the quote here that everything starts to become a risk assessment. I subconsciously do it all the time. And I think that very directly relates to what Michelle was referring to around assessing her environment and deciding what's suitable and not suitable for her and the level of risk she's willing to take. And then the next step is knowing when to actually seek help. So some people talk about the vagueness of instructions from healthcare professionals. So for example, come and see me when things are changing. What does that actually mean? Can that be more qualified and quantified? So that sense of when do I need to seek help, that can feel really overwhelming and quite isolating. Lack of awareness and understanding. And I really like this visual image of the iceberg. So many blood cancers and blood disorders fall into this category of being a hidden or an invisible illness. Perhaps you don't look like the stereotypical cancer patient that's often portrayed in the media, in our communities. However, for many people living with blood cancer and blood disorders, how one feels and how one looks are often quite different. So the iceberg really depicts on the surface, as you can see, which is a very small part of the whole picture, is what everyone else can see. It's your public face, I guess, what happens in outside your home, and behind closed doors or under the surface, as the iceberg depicts, there's so much more going on. I think that's, a really good visual description. Someone also described it to me once as being in limbo. So not being sick enough, but not also being well enough either. So it's a really, really tricky place to be. Challenges in explaining and understanding the diagnosis and the treatment plan. So when we talk about this, I'm referring to not only family and friends and our inner circles, but also perhaps our work colleagues and also healthcare professionals themselves. Because someone's not on treatment can often portray that the urgency or the acuity isn't there. So there's different perceptions and prioritization attached. In addition to having to explain your diagnosis to other people, you are then having to manage the various responses that you get. Sorry, I've just lost my spot. A really helpful insight someone offered is that they felt when they were really, really comfortable with their diagnosis and had really wrapped their head around it was the moment in time where they could start to share that diagnosis with other people. And until then, they kept it very much to themselves. I think it's also really important to highlight that there is often a lack of awareness that the symptoms of the actual disease itself and the impact that that has on someone's lifestyle can arise from the disease itself and not just the treatment. So there's a lot of conversations about side effects of treatment, but perhaps less conversations about the symptoms of disease itself. Then this lack of understanding can then often make people feel very isolated. And in that sense of isolation and that lack of understanding and issues going unrecognized and unacknowledged, it often means that there's very little way of support offered to help counteract some of those challenges. This one person on the screen, he said, sometimes I feel like a fraud because I don't look sick enough. I'm sure there's some of you nodding your heads at the moment. Grief and loss. There may be feelings of grief around changes to all aspects of life. And as Jen has alluded to several of them, that you may need to readjust or renegotiate. Loss of control and trust in your own health and your own body. We all have a really strong desire to want to have control of our lives, of our health, of our decision making. So, this loss of control in managing our own health and feeling safe and trusting of our body is can be really, really significant for some people who are diagnosed. Changes may also be seen in the way of self-image and self-worth. So the changes may lead to a shift in the way one sees themselves in relation to their friends, family, their workplace, and where they fit in relation to their community. So there's a couple of quotes here. Diagnosis sent me on a quiet, private, internalized grief-like path. I think that really beautifully sums it up. And what else could happen? So that sense of loss of trust. You discovered this. What could happen next? Change mood and behaviour. We actually understand that people with cancer have higher rates of depression and anxiety than the general population. And some of the research and literature actually suggests that people in watch and wait have higher rates of depression and anxiety than people in the general cancer population. And that is certainly our anecdotal experience as well. So one of the experiences is around health anxiety. And how this presents is there's, I guess, two extremes, and then there's a continuum. So there are people who have significant reassurance seeking behaviours. So need constant reassurance, seeking multiple tests, speaking to multiple different health professionals, gathering lots of sources of information to try and make sense and to try and feel some internal reassurance around the nature of their disease. And then there are people on the other end of the spectrum who are avoiders. So people who choose to turn away from the diagnosis and try and play down or underestimate some of the issues, symptoms that might be presenting. We hope that people are obviously on somewhere on that trajectory, but more within the middle. So seek reassurance when they need to, but also can move on past symptoms or past concerns when they can be easily rationalised. The other big area of that impacts on change mood and behaviour is that sense of living with uncertainty. And I think the quote below says it really eloquently. When will things change and how will I know? And I feel like I'm sitting here waiting for a bomb to go off. So actions you can take. This is the really the most important part. There is no magic solution, but there are really lots of things that you can do to manage. There are always going to be ups and downs, but we like to hope that by employing some of these strategies, that those ups and downs, sometimes I like to use the image of a roller coaster or a seesaw. So instead of those ups and downs being really significant and really drastic and traumatic, that we smooth those out. And yes, there's still going to be ups and downs, but they're not going to be as problematic. So recognizing your triggers. This is about knowing when you're on that downhill slide. With this, there is a need for a certain level of self-awareness. That awareness of when you're starting to go into that, I guess, metaphorical hole. What are the things that I start to think, feel, and do when I'm on that downhill slide? If you can recognize those, then there is then the capacity to do something about it, to put a brake on them. Managing negative self-talk. So naturally humans have a tendency to go to the negative, or to catastrophize, to make things bigger than what they actually are. So we potentially could automatically think that a cold symptom is disease progression. That's catastrophizing. I have a cold, it must be the disease. However, managing negative self-talk means stopping that thought process and going, one, I recognize that it's happening. Two, are there any alternatives to this possibility? What are the other possibilities? Checking your thinking against the facts. And then the other thing that's really, really helpful to do in helping to shift those negative thoughts is to share that with someone else, to gain that objectivity that you sometimes need when you're in your own head. To be able to speak it out loud and speak it to someone else can often help to break that negative self-talk down. Set clear expectations. So be specific with what you need. Others won't necessarily know what you need, particularly because people who are on watch and wait don't necessarily have the same, as we talked about, the stereotypical appearance of someone with cancer. So it's about being really clear about your expectations, and understanding what the cues are. Focusing on what is in your control. And Michelle referred to this beautifully and illustrated how focusing on the things that are within your control is really, really helpful. And I'm going to use this image up here of this circle. And there's 3 domains. One is the circle of control, and that covers things like what we think, how we feel, the way we behave, the actions we take, our values, our ethics, how we communicate, the information we choose to take on, what we eat, how we exercise, all those things. Circle of influence are the things that we can influence but we can't control. So, for example, relationships, our work team, their values. So we have an influence, but we can't necessarily change it of our own fruition as an individual. And then circle of concern is that more broader sphere of, our concern around climate change, politics, or international affairs, domestic affairs of a broad nature. So when you're in a crisis, or when you feel yourself on that downhill slide, being able to focus in on this domain, your circle of control, the things that you can control, is a very helpful strategy to help bring back in focus, to help halt that decline, that psychological decline. Prioritize what is important. So that might be, things that are of interest. It might be activities that bring you joy, meaning, and purpose. Might be really, really simple things. Maintain a realistic mindset. So a realistic mindset is about being hopeful, resilient, and optimistic, but also being realistic and being able to appraise the information and look at the pros and cons of information. The beauty of a realistic mindset is it allows for a multitude of feelings to exist. And what I mean by that is you can be happy and sad at the same time. You can be angry but also elated. We have many, many mixed emotions. And I think that is a really important mindset to work within. It helps us appraise information and also make really clear and thought through decisions. I think it's really important to note there are many other mindsets that we hear about and read about, and one of those is around being positive and staying positive. And I like to offer a word of gentle warning around a positive mindset, or always being in a positive mindset, or what we sometimes refer to as toxic positivity. I don't know any human who is able to remain positive all day, every day. And then particularly someone who's living with, a blood cancer. So what toxic positivity does is it creates a sense of the need to always feel good, to always be positive, and not allow yourself to feel what you need to feel. And then associated with that is often guilt. I feel guilty for feeling bad. And is that going to lead to something bad happening? So I really caution you around that sense of having to expect of yourself to be positive at all times. And creating structure, that's the last point here, creating structure within your life. And I think this is a really tangible way of building some control back into your life, as well as some meaning and focus and purpose. As someone really eloquently said, trying to create structure that helps bring some certainty. So you know when you've got structure in your day or in your week or in your month, there's some certainty that you can focus on. You can gravitate to that certainty to help manage the uncertainty. Thank you. That's a wrap from me. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Linda, Jenny, Michelle. Great comments, discussions. We hope that has given you some ideas,